Eleanor Vance moved with the quiet grace of a shadow, her polished black boots making no sound on the imported Italian marble of the Sterling Corporation's grand foyer. The air was thick with the scent of old money and fresh-cut lilies, a stark contrast to the faint, metallic tang of the industrial-strength cleaner on her hands. It was just past dawn, the hour when the city was still stretching awake, but the Sterling building was already a hive of hushed activity. Today was the day, the annual board meeting, but more significantly, the reading of old Mr. Sterling's last will and testament, a document shrouded in more mystery than the old man himself. Eleanor, in her crisp, dark grey maid's uniform, felt a familiar knot of unease tighten in her stomach. She had seen enough of these high-stakes dramas unfold in the gilded cages of the city's elite to know that today would be no different. The usual cast of characters would arrive, the vultures in tailored suits, the wives in their designer silks, all circling the vast fortune left behind. She continued her methodical polishing, her movements a practiced ballet of efficiency, when a sudden, sharp cry echoed from the grand staircase, slicing through the pre-dawn quiet like a shard of glass. The sound was followed by a thud, and Eleanor's head snapped up. A small, crumpled figure lay at the bottom of the sweeping staircase, a child's bright red ball rolling innocently away. Her heart lurched. It was Leo, young Master's son, a boy with eyes too wide, and a wheelchair that was usually his constant companion. He had somehow managed to get out of it, perhaps trying to retrieve his toy. His small body trembled, and a whimper escaped his lips, before anyone else could react. Before the flurry of security guards or the panicked shouts of the nannies, Eleanor was already moving. Her uniform, usually a symbol of her invisibility, became a blur as she knelt beside the boy, her hands still smelling faintly of lemon polish, gently checking him for injury. His face was pale, his dark curls matted with a sheen of sweat, but his eyes, though tear-filled, held a spark of recognition as they met hers. "Eleanor," he whispered, his voice reedy. She offered a soft, reassuring smile, a warmth that seemed to instantly calm the frantic tremor in his small frame. It was in that moment, as she carefully helped him back into his chair, that the first of the tailored suits began to descend, their faces a mixture of alarm and annoyance, their expensive watches glinting in the burgeoning light. The man leading the charge was Mr. Julian Sterling, the current CEO, a man whose presence was as sharp and unyielding as the creases in his bespoke suits. His eyes, the color of a winter sky, swept over the scene, dismissing Leo's distress with a flicker of impatience before settling on Eleanor. "Vance," he barked, his voice accustomed to instant obedience, "what is the meaning of this? Why is the boy out of his chair? And why are you not attending to your duties?" His tone was laced with an implicit accusation, as if Leo's fall was somehow her fault. Eleanor straightened, her hands still resting gently on Leo's shoulders, a silent shield. "He fell, sir. He's all right now. I was just helping him back into his chair." Her voice was calm, steady, devoid of the usual deference that her position demanded. Julian Sterling's jaw tightened. He disliked anything that disrupted his meticulously ordered world, especially before a meeting of such import. "See that it doesn't happen again," he snapped, his gaze lingering on her for a moment too long, a flicker of something unreadable in his cold eyes before he turned his attention back to his son, now surrounded by nannies. Eleanor simply nodded, her expression unreadable, and pushed Leo's chair towards the private elevator, away from the impending storm of the board meeting. The grand boardroom, a cavernous space of polished mahogany and hushed whispers, was already filling when Eleanor returned, a tray of freshly brewed coffee and delicate pastries in her hands. The air hummed with barely contained tension. Julian Sterling sat at the head of the long table, his face a mask of controlled anticipation. Around him, the board members, a collection of the city's most influential figures, shifted in their leather chairs, their expensive watches catching the light. Eleanor moved silently, pouring coffee, offering sugar, her uniform a stark contrast to the luxurious fabrics and gleaming accessories that surrounded her. She was a ghost in this elite world, meant to be seen only when serving, heard never. Her eyes, however, missed nothing. She observed the subtle glances, the tight smiles, the unspoken rivalries that played out across the faces of these powerful men and women. In a corner, Leo sat quietly in his wheelchair, a book open on his lap, occasionally glancing up, his young eyes absorbing the scene with a wisdom beyond his years. He was the only one who seemed truly at peace in the room, perhaps because he understood the true value of things far better than the adults around him. The lawyer, a man with a perpetually grave expression and a voice like dry leaves, began to read old Mr. Sterling's will. The words, initially a drone, soon began to prickle the ears of the assembled company. Clause after clause, the vast fortune was meticulously divided, the expected beneficiaries receiving their due. Julian Sterling's face remained impassive, but his fingers, resting on the table, tapped a silent rhythm of impatience. Then came the unexpected, a clause tucked away near the end that sent a ripple of murmurs through the room. Old Mr. Sterling had stipulated a significant portion of his wealth, a substantial trust to be allocated to a foundation dedicated to providing legal aid for underprivileged communities, with a peculiar condition: the foundation's oversight, for the first 5 years, would fall to an individual who demonstrated not only exceptional legal acumen, but also an unwavering commitment to justice and quiet dignity, someone who had served the Sterling household with loyalty and discretion. A collective gasp, then a confused silence. Who could this be? The lawyer cleared his throat, his gaze sweeping the room before landing, unexpectedly, on Eleanor. Julian Sterling leaned forward, his voice a low growl. "Mr. Davies, surely there's a mistake. This is a private family matter. What could a maid possibly have to do with the execution of my father's will, let alone a legal foundation?" His words hung in the air, dripping with condescension, the implication clear. Eleanor Vance, in her humble uniform, was utterly out of place, an unwelcome intrusion into their world of power and privilege. The other board members shifted uncomfortably, some casting pitying glances at Eleanor, others nodding in agreement with Sterling's unspoken sentiment. Eleanor, however, remained still, her gaze unwavering as it met Julian Sterling's cold eyes. The room seemed to hold its breath, waiting for her to shrink, to apologize, to disappear into the background as she always had. Leo, from his corner, looked up from his book, his eyes fixed on Eleanor, a silent plea in their depths. The lawyer, Mr. Davies, adjusted his spectacles, a faint tremor in his hand. "Mr. Sterling, with all due respect, your father's will is quite explicit. He foresaw this reaction, I believe." He specifically named Eleanor Vance. A collective gasp ripped through the boardroom. Julian Sterling's face, usually so composed, contorted into a mask of disbelief and rage. "This is preposterous," he thundered, slamming his fist on the polished table, the sound echoing through the stunned silence. "My father must have..." been senile. A maid, to oversee a multi-million-dollar foundation. This is an insult to his legacy, to my legacy. His eyes, blazing with fury, fixed on Eleanor. Vance, you are to remain silent. This is not your concern. You are a servant here, nothing more. Do not speak a word, do not interfere. You will be dismissed from your duties immediately if you utter a single sound. The threat hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. The other board members exchanged nervous glances, some looking away, others simply staring at Eleanor, waiting for her inevitable retreat. The humiliation was palpable, a thick shroud descending upon her. Yet Eleanor did not flinch. Her quiet strength, usually hidden beneath layers of deference, began to surface, a subtle tremor in the air around her. Then a small, clear voice cut through the tension. But she's not just a maid. All eyes turned to Leo, who had pushed his wheelchair slightly forward, his small hand gripping the armrest. His gaze was firm, directed at his father. Grandpa always said Eleanor was the smartest person he knew. He said she knew more about justice than all the lawyers combined. Julian Sterling scoffed. Leo, that's enough. Your grandfather was an old man, prone to sentimentality. You don't understand these things. But Leo persisted, his voice gaining a surprising strength. He said she went to Harvard. He said she chose to work here because she wanted to understand people, not just laws. The words hung in the air, a shocking revelation. A collective intake of breath. Julian Sterling's face paled, a flicker of genuine confusion replacing his anger. He looked at Eleanor, then back at his son, then at the lawyer, Mr. Davies, who now offered a small, knowing smile. Eleanor Vance, her gaze still fixed on Julian Sterling, finally spoke. Her voice, though soft, carried an undeniable authority that silenced the room more effectively than any shout. Mr. Sterling, she began, her tone measured each word. Carefully articulated, while I appreciate your concern for your father's legacy, I must respectfully correct your interpretation of the law regarding testamentary capacity and the validity of a will. She paused, allowing her words to sink in, the silence in the room now absolute, save for the faint hum of the air conditioning. Under the Uniform Probate Code, Section 22501, a testator must be at least 18 years of age and of sound mind. Sound mind is generally defined as the ability to know the nature and extent of one's property, the natural objects of one's bounty, and the nature of the act of making a will. There is no legal precedent, nor any evidence to suggest that Mr. Sterling lacked such capacity. Furthermore, the concept of undue influence, which I presume you are implicitly suggesting, requires proof of coercion that destroys the free agency of the testator. Again, there is no evidence to support such a claim. Her voice gained a quiet power, each legal term delivered with precision and clarity. Moreover, Eleanor continued, her eyes now sweeping across the stunned faces of the board members. Your father's will, as read by Mr. Davies, clearly demonstrates a well-considered and deliberate distribution of his assets. The establishment of a legal aid foundation aligns perfectly with his known philanthropic interests in his later years, particularly his growing concern for access to justice for all citizens, not just those with means. His choice of overseer, while unconventional to some, is explicitly stated and, in the absence of any legal challenge based on incapacity or undue influence, is legally binding. She took a breath, her chest rising and falling imperceptibly beneath the grey uniform. To challenge this clause would not only be a protracted and costly legal battle, But it would also, I believe, be a profound disservice to the very spirit of your father's final wishes. The room remained in a state of suspended animation, the words hanging in the air, each one a perfectly aimed dart. Julian Sterling, for the first time in his life, was utterly speechless. His face, once a picture of arrogant fury, was now a canvas of shock, then dawning realization, and finally, a deep, burning humiliation. A low murmur began to ripple through the room, not of dissent, but of awe. The board members, initially dismissive, now looked at Eleanor Vance with a mixture of respect and disbelief. One of them, an elderly woman with sharp, intelligent eyes who had served on the board for decades, slowly began to clap, a soft, deliberate sound that quickly grew into a resounding applause. It started hesitantly, then swelled, filling the grand boardroom with a wave of unexpected admiration. Eleanor, still standing by the coffee tray, simply inclined her head, a small, almost imperceptible gesture of acknowledgement. She didn't bask in the attention. She simply accepted it, her dignity unyielding. Julian Sterling, however, remained frozen, his gaze fixed on Eleanor, the full weight of her words, and the public humiliation crashing down upon him. He had told her to stay silent, to know her place, and she had responded, not with defiance, but with an irrefutable display of intellect and legal mastery that had utterly dismantled his authority. The silence that followed the applause was different now. It was not the silence of fear or contempt, but of profound respect. Later that day, in the hushed elegance of a private dining room, Eleanor Vance sat across from Mr. Davies, the lawyer, and a visibly chastened Julian Sterling. The crisp white tablecloth, the gleaming silver, the delicate china, all the trappings of the elite world she usually served, now served her. Julian Sterling cleared his throat, his gaze avoiding hers. "Miss Vance," he began, his voice strained. I owe you an apology, a profound one. My behavior earlier was inexcusable. My father, he never spoke of your background. He simply said you were the most astute person he knew, and that he trusted your judgment implicitly." He paused, running a hand over his face. "He said you taught him more about true justice than any textbook ever could." Eleanor simply listened, her expression calm. "He also said," Julian continued, his voice barely above a whisper, "that you chose to work here, to observe, to understand the human element of the law, the real-world impact that legal theory often misses." Eleanor finally spoke, her voice still quiet, but firm. "Mr. Sterling, your father was a remarkable man. He saw beyond titles and uniforms. He saw people." She didn't gloat, didn't rub his nose in his earlier arrogance. Her words were a gentle, yet powerful, reminder of the lesson he had just learned. Julian Sterling looked up, his eyes meeting hers for the first time without a trace of condescension. He saw not a maid, but a woman of immense intellect and unwavering moral compass. "He also left a small, personal note for me," Julian said, pulling a folded piece of parchment from his inner jacket pocket. He wrote, "Julian, if you ever forget what true strength looks like, look to Eleanor. She carries it in her quiet wisdom, not in her loudest pronouncements." He swallowed hard. He knew, didn't he? He knew I would try to dismiss you. Eleanor offered a small, sad smile. "Your father understood human nature, Mr. Sterling, and he understood the difference between power and true authority." The conversation continued, for hours, not as a negotiation, but as a genuine exchange of ideas. Eleanor spoke of her time at Harvard Law, of her decision to step away from the traditional legal path, to seek a deeper understanding of the societal structures that often prevented justice from reaching those who needed it most. She spoke of her quiet observations, the countless stories she had heard from the staff, the glimpses she had caught of the Sterling family's inner workings, the subtle injustices that played out even in the most privileged of environments. Julian Sterling listened, truly listened, perhaps for the first time in his life, to someone who had seen his world from the outside, from the bottom up. He learned that kindness from workers, the shy eye contact of those often overlooked, held a warmth and wisdom that his cold billionaire circles had never offered. He saw the contrast between his expensive watches and Eleanor's broken sneakers, and understood deeply the true value of empathy. The next morning, the news of Eleanor Vance's appointment as the head of the Sterling Legal Aid Foundation swept through the city's elite circles like wildfire. The initial shock quickly gave way to a grudging respect, fueled by whispers of her Harvard background and the undeniable display of her legal prowess in the boardroom. Julian Sterling, in a public statement, acknowledged his father's wisdom and Eleanor's exceptional qualifications, a rare moment of humility from a man known for his unyielding pride. He even announced a significant personal donation to the foundation, a gesture that surprised many. Eleanor, however, remained unchanged. She continued to move with the same quiet dignity, her focus now shifting from polishing marble to building a foundation that would truly make a difference. Her first public appearance as the foundation's director was at a small, crowded community center in a less affluent part of the city. The contrast to the Sterling mansion was stark. Peeling paint, worn wooden floors, the air thick with the scent of cheap coffee and hope. She wasn't wearing her maid's uniform, but a simple, elegant dress that still conveyed her understated grace. As she spoke, her voice clear and resonant, outlining the foundation's mission to provide free legal services. A young boy in a faded t-shirt, who sat in a wheelchair near the front, looked up at her, his eyes wide with a quiet understanding. It was Leo Sterling, brought there by his nannies, at his own insistence. He had slipped away from the grandeur of his home, drawn by something he recognized in Eleanor. After the speech, as people swarmed around her, eager to shake her hand, to share their stories, Leo wheeled himself quietly towards her. He didn't say a word, just extended a small, hesitant hand, clutching a worn silver ring. It was an old signet ring, engraved with the Sterling family crest, one that old Mr. Sterling used to wear. Eleanor recognized it instantly. She had seen it on his finger countless times as she served him tea. Leo pressed it into her palm, his small fingers closing around hers for a moment. "Grandpa wanted you to have it," he whispered, his voice barely audible above the din. He said it was for someone who truly understood what it meant to be a Sterling. Not just the name, but the responsibility. Eleanor's eyes welled up, a rare display of emotion. This small, disabled child, with his quiet wisdom, had given her the most profound moment of respect she had ever received. It was a silent acknowledgement, a passing of a torch from one quiet strength to another. In the months that followed, the Sterling Legal Aid Foundation flourished under Eleanor's leadership. She brought not only her sharp legal mind, but also a deep empathy for the people she served. She remembered the faces of those she had seen struggling, the quiet desperation in their eyes, the injustices that had gone unaddressed. She built a team of dedicated lawyers who shared her vision, who understood that justice wasn't just about winning cases, but about restoring dignity. Julian Sterling, surprisingly, became a quiet supporter, often visiting the foundation. Observing Eleanor's work, a subtle change in his demeanor. He no longer carried the same arrogant air. A newfound humility had softened the edges of his once cold persona. He even began to volunteer his time, offering business advice to struggling clients. A man who had once only understood profit, now learning the value of purpose. One afternoon, Eleanor found herself in a bustling airport, waiting for a flight to a national legal conference where she was scheduled to deliver the keynote address. She was no longer the invisible maid. She was a recognized figure, a beacon of hope for many. As she sat, a young woman, her face etched with worry, approached her. "Miss Vance." The woman asked hesitantly, I saw you speak at the community center. My brother, he's been wrongly accused, and we don't have the money for a good lawyer." Eleanor listened patiently, her gaze kind. She saw the fear in the young woman's eyes, the same fear she had seen countless times. She reached into her bag, pulled out a card with the foundation's number, and offered a reassuring smile. "Come to us. We will help you." As the young woman walked away, a glimmer of hope in her eyes, Eleanor felt a profound sense of peace. She had walked away from the grand mansion, from the world of polished boots and cold billionaires, but she had carried her dignity, her strength, and her quiet wisdom with her. And in doing so, she had inspired not just a powerful man, but countless others to believe in the possibility of true justice. The journey had been long, filled with silent struggles and public humiliations, but now, standing on the precipice of a new future, Eleanor Vance knew, with absolute certainty, that she had truly found her voice, not in a shout, but in the unwavering power of truth.